My name is Mike Steeves. I'm the author of Giving Up. That was the first book that I had read of his. And the epigraph for Giving Up actually comes from sickness unto death. But it was fear and trembling that had a pretty big effect on me, I think. I was just struck by his definition of faith in the book. He has a bunch of different examples, but the big one is Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac, and which he doesn't do, of course, but he's asked to do it by God, and Abraham is up for it, and he's not excited about it, but he's going to do it because that's what God asks of him. And what I thought was really interesting about how Kierkegaard breaks it down is he explains that Abraham couldn't think that Isaac was going to be resurrected, because the point to the act of faith is that he actually has to think that he's going to be doing this, that he's going to be sacrificing his son. So the other thing is, God told Abraham that he was going to populate the world with his progeny and whatnot, and Isaac was his only son at the time, and Abraham had no reason to believe that another one was coming along. So it was a really strange request on God's behalf. And there's all sorts of, basically, Kierkegaard's point is that faith is doing something, believing in something that you actually believe is impossible. And that struck me because I felt that it's kind of an insane way to operate. And in fact, if you think about faith, if you were to practice that in everyday life, that would be a pretty self-destructive way to go about your business. And yet there's something beautiful in the concept. And so at the time that I had read that book, I can't remember whether or not I had read that book while, and I had already started working on this book. But they were definitely, it was right around the same time. And so it struck me that, that would be an apt metaphor for a bunch of things. Wanting things that you think might actually be not possible for you, and yet you persist in wanting them. And so that's kind of where the influence of that book came from. It does seem to be a theme right now in coverage of literature, that you have books where people are writing about things that are, intensely personal. The boring answer would be to say that, there's all sorts of literature stretching way back that does this sort of thing. And, some of the writers that I really like, or some of the literature that I've been reading over the last few years, German language literature and whatnot, has precedent for this that goes back, to the 70s and earlier, like Peter Handke and this sort of thing. But as I said, that would be the kind of the obnoxious or the boring answer to say, oh, people have done it before. So there's nothing about what's happening right now that could be tied into issues of the way that our society is kind of being blown open, and that privacy is kind of gone the way of the dodo bird and this sort of thing. With respect to this book, I would be lying if I said that I, had considered these themes when I was writing it. What it came down to for me was I had picked a certain form and style to write the work. And when you do that, what happened to me, at least, is you come up against things that you realize, oh, I'm going to have to go here because I've chosen to depict things in this way. And so I can't all of a sudden pull back and say, yada, yada, yada. I meticulously described the way somebody eats breakfast, so now I have to meticulously describe other aspects of their life in the same way. So it was kind of a necessity for the way I had decided to tell the story. But I think probably, I'm not a great thinker, so I don't know if I could encapsulate what's going on in the culture or anything like that. But my suspicion is, in the past, when people have decided to tell things that were talked around or not discussed in polite society, that the reason they did this was in order to, for lack of, in a cliched way, like take the power back and that sort of thing. So I assume, you could say it's prurient and say people are just confessing to things because they want to be seen and heard and known, and so we're shameless. And I'm sure there's a component of that. But it might also be that we feel that there's certain areas of life that we're kind of passing over without addressing in a way that art can sometimes do. And maybe that's what's happening there. I started writing the book out of my own sort of personal struggle. And it won't be a mystery to anybody reading the book that, a lot of my own experience is put into it. So the short answer would be, narcissism. A more fleshed out answer would be that I started writing about the James character, and after I had finished the first section of the book, I realized, I thought it was okay. I thought it was well written, but I thought it was pretty narrow. And I felt that if other people read it, they would be left kind of wanting a different perspective. And so that's when I thought, well, why not tell the other half? And he had already alluded, he mentions his wife in the first section. So I thought, hey, I'll do a he said, she said. And then what happened there was, James had a problem, which is that he's trying to write or do his life's work, and he's worried that he's not up for it. And so I wanted Mary to have a problem as well to balance it out. And I wanted hers not to be like abstract in the way that his is. I wanted hers to be rooted in something that was very concrete. And so that's when I decided to do something about, people wanting to have a child and having difficulty getting that done. Because that's not like a life's work that maybe you'll one day have success. Like having a child is you either have a child or you don't have a child. There's no midway point. So that was that. When I started writing about that, her character did start to kind of become its own thing and became compelling to me. And that's when it became like a couple story. It actually wasn't a couple story when I started writing it. It was a story about failure, and then it kind of turned into something else. What I would say was it's not as bad as it looks. That the decision behind writing it that way had to do with the fact that it was going to be narrated kind of as these people recounting a story, perhaps aloud, but perhaps, in their own head. And I knew, I had tried to write books before that had like, a decade sort of sweep to them and characters and, now you're in a castle and that sort of stuff. And I wasn't good at it. I'm speaking flippantly, but I think that's a difficult thing to do. And I wasn't a natural at that sort of thing. And so I decided to play to my strengths with this one and try to write something that was very limited in scope, in time and place and characters and all that sort of thing. So I knew that it was actually going to be technically or superficially like a boring story, and I wanted to make it unboring, and make it compelling, and make it the sort of story that, you know, people would be compelled to like. I wanted to write a page turner where nothing much happened, and so I figured that one way to do that was to have it kind of flow, like one damn thing after another. And to have a certain breathless quality to it. And I had read a lot of fiction that had that going on at the time, and I liked it. I liked that you don't know when to stop or where to stop. It just, you keep on, because everybody does that when you're reading a book. You're like, oh, I'll stop here. You know, you look 2 pages ahead. And with this one, they would be like kind of screwed. So there was a bit of like, sort of marketing mentality, actually, which might sound strange, but I wanted it to kind of have a propulsive quality to it. And I thought that removing paragraphs breaks would facilitate that to a certain extent. And also, to be honest, it's just the way I wrote it. And it would have seemed a bit superficial to insert stuff like paragraph breaks and that sort of thing after the fact, because that's what is typical of published fiction. It was kind of how it came out. There are, like, off the top of my head, I know of, you know, a bunch of different writers that have done a lot with longer sentences. You know, on the American side, you have David Foster Wallace, but in Europe, you know, you have Laszlo Krasznahorkai or Javier Marias. I mean, the list goes on and on. A lot of people are doing it right now. Once again, I could give a boring, like, oh, but Henry James wrote long sentences, or so did Faulkner, so there's nothing about what's happening now. And it's kind of something that's always taken place, but I don't think that that's likely true. Proust, of course, too, is probably, for my mind, like the master of that sort of thing. And I don't think I write Proustian sentences, but I had him in mind when I was writing the book, in the way that his sentences are like little stories. And he will start one off and kind of take you around the world and stick the landing at the end. And, you know, that's just kind of a cool thing. So, like, in a very theoretical literary way, it's just kind of impressive when you see a writer do that, and you want to see if you can pull it off as well. But, you know, I mentioned before the breathless quality of the book, and the long sentence facilitates that. And there is an element, maybe, and I'm going to say something about the culture right now, that the culture is a bit breathless. The culture is a bit one damn thing after another, you know, one clip to the next, nothing ever stopping. And it gets a bit sort of jumbled up, and a lot of things, sometimes you can find yourself, you know, starting on a clip about a war and getting into like cat videos, and then back to, you know, it'll all lead some strange place. And so the long sentence can sometimes pack a lot of incongruous material into one phrase. And as a result, you know, it can be funny, it can be very strange. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, like, obviously you're not gonna read like, you know, a writer that I love like James Ellroy doesn't write long sentences, and the sort of the fiction world that he exists in, like, would probably not think that the long sentence is necessarily a great thing always, and that there's a pretentious or literary-ist type quality to it. But for me, it just kind of sometimes worked to represent these characters, their worlds, their thoughts, what's going on with them. And as I said, you know, sometimes they can just be a bit funny. And so, yeah, that's how that happened. The only light in the apartment is the bluish illumination coming from the computers.
Hang on a second, let me film the show.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Quiet on the set. She always does when I do that.
Yeah, I'm sure she finds it charming. The only light in the apartment is the bluish illumination coming from the computer screen at the end of the hall. He doesn't turn the lights on because he doesn't want Mary to know that he's home, at least not until he's had time to compose himself. But after taking his shoes off, he ends up tripping over the broom. The broom is totally unexpected and completely invisible to him. Something about its place in the hallway is incongruous and even disturbing. Still, his reaction as it clatters to the floor is a bit over the top, as if he'd been surprised by something much more perilous. Motherfuck, he says. Jesus motherfucking Christ on the fucking cross. I'm going to have a fucking aneurysm. What is this? He picks up the broom. A fucking broom? Mary, sitting at the computer, waits for his little fit to pass. As it happens, by not saying anything to him, she actually hastens the process. He eventually calms down, takes a seat on the couch, places the broom across his lap, and asks in his best imitation of a casual tone whether she was doing some light cleaning while he was out. But she doesn't respond, and he wonders if maybe she's looking at something disturbing or reading an email with some bad news about a close friend or family member, her parents even. A look at the screen confirms that she's just doing what she usually does when she's bored or tired, which is look at her friends' profiles on Facebook. She asks him if he had a nice break, and he says that he did, and that he's feeling refreshed and ready to get back to work. Sometimes that's all he needs, just to get away for a bit and clear his head, because when he's down there for too long, it's like he gets too close to what he's working on, and he can't see it anymore, like his face is pressed up to the TV screen or to the pages of a book. So just by getting out and seeing other people, he's able to get a little distance and put the work back in the right perspective. She wants to know if other people were out walking around at midnight on a Tuesday. She wonders why it takes 2 hours to get some distance and regain his perspective. When he had said seeing other people, he explains, it didn't mean that he'd been walking around and staring at strangers. It was a figure of speech, and he doesn't normally go for 2-hour walks, but it's a nice night, and he was feeling cramped down in the basement, and so he ended up staying out longer than usual. Well, she says, a cat came into the apartment while you were gone. He asks her what she means when she says that a cat came into the apartment. The look that she gives him before he's even done asking this question shows that while this is exactly what she'd been expecting him to ask, she is still disappointed to hear him say it, since she thinks that this sort of thing is beneath him. Why, she wonders, does he pretend that he doesn't understand what she meant when she said that a cat came into the apartment, when he actually knows exactly what she is talking about? Why does he act like he's not intensely aware of everything that's going on around him when she knows for a fact she knows for a fact that he is extremely sensitive and notices the most insignificant details and is basically the most perceptive person she's ever met? What is the point of making her explain herself when he already knows what she is going to say? But he insists that he honestly doesn't know what she's talking about, and even if he is as perceptive as she says, which he doesn't think is the case, then all this means is that he's noticed something. She is obviously upset about something. A complete stranger would have picked up on it, and that when she said that a cat came into the apartment, he could tell she was holding something back, something much worse than a cat coming into the apartment. There's literally no way he could know what she had meant, because no matter how observant he might be or how well they know each other after all these years, he isn't Sherlock fucking Holmes, not even close. So at the end of the day, the only way he could know was if she told him, which she hadn't, not yet. She gives him the same look as before and says that he's still pretending to misunderstand her, which at this point is just kind of mean. She knows that it is impossible for him to know exactly what happened, but he knew that something had happened, so why did she feel like if she hadn't said anything, that he would have never asked her what was wrong? Why does he make her feel like he is doing her a favor by listening to her? And why does he ask her what she means when she tells him that a cat came into the apartment, when he should really be asking her if she was all right? Had Mary chased it out, or had she run into their bedroom and waited for it to leave on its own? This is, of course, what he'd meant by his question, he explains. It's a figure of speech. Everything that comes out of your mouth is a figure of speech, she says. It seems to him more than a little ironic that at the same time as she's accusing him of playing dumb, this is more or less exactly what she's doing. Anyway, he says, I'm sorry about the way I phrased my question. What I meant to say was, how did the cat get in, and were you able to chase it out? And if not, where is it now? Well, she says, he came in through the front window. How, he wonders. Wasn't the screen closed? It was, but she pushed through it. Now it is his turn to get frustrated. Something had obviously happened while he'd been on his break, and he doesn't understand why she won't just tell him. In response to this little outburst, she stands up and turns on the lights so he can see the blood that is smeared all over the floor. Jesus fucking Christ, he says. What the hell happened in here?